Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. On behalf of the Center for Strategic Perspectives at the Institute of Strategic Studies Islamabad, I welcome you all at today's seminar titled A Regional Approach to Transboundary Water Issues, Pathways and Challenges. The seminar is organized by CISP in collaboration with the Hans Seidel Foundation, Pakistan. We are honored to have with us acclaimed speakers from within Pakistan and across the borders. The seminar is divided into two sessions. Session 1 is titled Transboundary Water Issues in South Asia. The speakers of the session include Hassan Abbas, founding member ZISAC, who will be speaking to us on the issues of enhancing transboundary cooperation in water resource management. Second speaker of the session is Dr. Medha Bisht, Senior Assistant Professor, IR South Asian University, New Delhi. Dr. Bisht will be speaking on enhancing transboundary cooperation in water resource management. With this brief overview of the proceedings, I hand the floor to Director CSP, Dr. Neelam Negar, for her introductory remarks.
Honorable guests, distinguished speakers, and participants, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good morning to you all. On behalf of my team, I welcome you all at today's seminar, which is held in collaboration with Hans Seidel Foundation, Pakistan. At the outset, let me express my gratitude to Dr. Stephen Kodela, Resident Representative, Hans Seidel Foundation, for cooperating with us in arranging this event. I'm also grateful to all the speakers who have joined us today this morning for this important topic. And I'm grateful to two of our distinguished speakers who have joined us from India and Bangladesh. The center focuses on economic and political aspects of Pakistan's relations with United States, Europe, and Russia. It also focuses on issues related to Pakistan's domestic economy, climate change, and other aspects of non-traditional security issues. More recently, we have been focusing on Pakistan's economic security and other non-traditional issues. And today's event is one aspect of that. As you all are aware that water security is a multi-dimensional issue, which directly impacts human security along with being significant for sustainable development of a country. Though there are many examples where legal agreements on water issues between upper and lower riparian countries have been upheld, even though conflicts have persisted over issues. Therefore, the discussion on water issues need to go beyond bilateral negotiations in order to examine the ways through which states in the region can adapt to the emerging interests and need to manage their water resources. I once again thank you all and have a good day.
I now invite Director General, Institute of Strategic Studies Islamabad, Ambassador Azaz Ahmed Chaudhry, for his welcome remarks.
Thank you, and very warm welcome to all those of you who are joining us on Zoom. Greetings from the ISSI. I must also start with a word of thanks to our partner for this program, Hans Seidel Foundation. Its leader here, Stephen Kodela, and his team, Meher Gawash, and others. German Stiftungen are now quite engaged in the issues of discussions on governance issues and on regional cooperation. In many ways, they are relaying their own experiences in Europe, which emanated from good governance and regional integration. So thank you, HSF, for partnering with us. Now, three key issues on this very important subject. One, water has to be treated as a source and origin of life. If there is no water, no life. So that's quite understandable. So we have to protect water as if we protect our life. The second, water has also been a source of conflict, especially the transboundary waters, the shared waters. Two approaches have been followed mostly. Either it is a cooperative approach or a confrontational approach. Considerable potential if we follow a cooperative approach rather than a confrontational approach. I give you the example of Danube River, which I have traveled on a ferry to 10 countries. It passes through 10 countries. That means it, and from where it starts from Western Germany right up to, I think, Black Sea. So it is a source of navigation. It is a source of, it's a commercial highway. It is used for generating power, for agriculture use. So it is a prime example of how rivers in a cooperative approach can benefit the entire region. Similarly, Rhine River, and I've seen how rivers have been tamed and put to much greater use. And Pakistan is so lucky to have Indus River Basin, because what a slow, nice gradient from north to south. And if these rivers are tamed with its tributaries, we can do work magic with it. Now, coming to transboundary waters in South Asia, which is actually the subject of today's talk, I see a mixed picture. There is cooperation and there is conflict. Sometimes I do see on both sides of the border politicization of the issue. People talk of water terrorism, and even in its statement attributed to Prime Minister Modi that blood and river cannot flow in the same direction. Similarly, here in Pakistan, people say that maybe India wants to have control of water and thereby a strategic use of water in times when Pakistan needs water. So these are some of the issues which are also on the table. Now, challenge for us is that how do we make sure that our accent of cooperation is much weightier, much higher than accent of confrontation. So therefore, it is important that given the importance of water for our national security, for our own security of the nation, it is important that we find more cooperative approaches to protect the shared waters. So with that in view, we have a commendable panel, very learned panel. Dr. Ashraf, he's heading the Research Council, Dr. Hassan Abbas, Dr. Midha Bisht from India, Mr. Ali Tokir Sheikh, Dr. Sara Noreen, and Dr. Shaheen Akhtar. And I hope that this will be a very, very useful session for all of us. Thank you very much once again for coming, and look forward to hearing our experts today.
Ladies and gentlemen, I now request Dr. Stephen Kudela, Resident Representative, Hans Seidel Foundation, Pakistan, for his opening remarks.
Dear Ambassador Chowdhury, Dr. Neelam Niggar, Dr. Mohammed Ashraf, Mr. Ali Shaikh, distinguished speakers and guests from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and Germany, ladies and gentlemen. Salam alaikum and good morning. What might be the best way to bring people with different interests together? The best way to bring people together might be to show them a challenge which they all face and support them to solve it jointly. If this challenge is of real importance, at least two results can be achieved. First, the people realize that they have substantial common interests. Very often, they have actually much more in common than what divides them. And second, by bringing experts from different backgrounds together to solve an important joint problem, solutions are being developed which come from different perspectives. These different perspectives together offer the best possible approach, one that is holistic, international, and interdisciplinary. That is also the idea behind today's seminar discussion on a regional approach to transboundary water issues, pathways, and challenges. With our distinguished partner, ISSI, we have brought together experts from different fields and countries to discuss a challenge that is of prime significance to the region of South Asia and the world. In the case of Pakistan, many water challenges originate in the country's dependence on the Indus River system. Pakistan is one of the most naturally arid countries in the world. Around 1/4 of the country's land are cultivated, and most of this agriculture is actually water intensive and dependent on man-made irrigation systems. The glaciers feeding the Indus River system are melting due to climate change. The increase of monsoon rains can help to balance this out. However, these rains can only be of long-term benefit if their water is stored and distributed. HSF Pakistan gladly supports ISSI to host today's seminar discussions on transboundary water issues in South Asia and water security challenges in the region. HSF is a German political foundation that works for democracy, peace, and development in Pakistan, South Asia, and worldwide. I am very happy that my counterpart from HSF India, Volker Plan, is joining us live from New Delhi online today. So greetings from Islamabad. Ladies and gentlemen, no matter what different political or ideological views we might have, mind you, we all cannot possibly live for more than 3 days without water. Usable water is a sustainable common interest, is a substantial common interest of all of us, and water scarcity is a real problem. This problem needs the best possible solutions, so let us work together on this. Thank you again for coming today, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussions ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin with our first working session. I request the chair, Dr. Mohammed Ashraf, and the speaker, Dr. Hassan Abbas, to please come on the stage. Dr. Bisht will join us through Zoom.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. We are really thankful to HSF and ISSI for organizing this very important seminar, webinar, addressing on the transboundary water issues. My colleagues, Kudela and Ambassador Chaudhary, he has already given, here they have in fact set the scene for this talk and this webinar. Without wasting time, I would request Dr. Hassan Abbas for his talk on enhancing transboundary cooperation in water resources management. That's over to you. Would you like to on the stage or as you like? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. So it's about enhancing transboundary cooperation in water resource management. Okay, so we'll start with the emerging global mind, not just on water resources, but on many other things. Now, read this statement. Women and slaves were treated as properties and were traded as commodities. That was a norm of the past, and people would do it everywhere in the world. Today, you can't say this thing with a straight face that even then it was right. But the global mind was different. They thought that's the way to go. So as the humanity is progressing in different fields, the mind is changing. And what is emerging global mind on the water resources? Wanganui River in New Zealand was giving the rights of a living person. That was in March 2017, very recent. Then Rio Trato in Colombia also got the legal rights in May 2017. Ecuador granted legal rights to elements of nature, which included forests, mountains, rivers, deserts.
So this is how the things are emerging. Our neighbors, India, in 2017, soon after the decision of New Zealand, they also, one of their state courts granted the rights to Ganga and Jamuna of a living person. Although these rights were overturned by their Supreme Court exactly after 109 days, citing economic reasons. And this is so unfortunate that we still think that by destroying certain elements of nature, it is okay to earn money. But that global mind is changing. There's a very famous movement, Rights of Nature. It is gaining impetus all over the world. It recognizes the human right, the clean environment as a human right. So they are also playing with the laws, international laws and local laws, that if you declare this as a human right, then so many things under the constitutions of so many countries would be forced to or obliged to take care of the environment. They argue that if corporations can have the rights of a person, why not elements of nature? Well, there's another very important thing coming up, and that is ecocide. Now, this movement is again gaining impetus. They define ecocide as a means, unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. Now, this is a definition which they are going to present before Roman statute for the International Criminal Court, where ecocide could be tried as fifth war crime, because currently there are four, so they want to make a fifth war crime that ecocide could be tried as a war crime. And the definition is there, a lot of work has been there, and it is only a matter of the assembly to sit together and approve it. And then read this definition. So many people, so many organizations, so many projects can actually be coming under the grip of this crime. So the law is one of the very strong instruments of implementation of anything. And when it comes to nature, those are the kind of laws which are emerging in the world. And it's only a matter of time. Some people say it would never happen, but there are some people who say that it can happen anytime. So although the prediction of the law is divided, that when it will happen, but it will happen. And then, you know, the things would drastically change all over the world. Pakistan and India are not too far away from global mind. The adaptation of global mind is also taking place in both of these countries. India's constitution, Article 51A(g), says that protect and improve natural environment, including forest, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for all living creatures. Now, this is their constitution saying. And in Pakistan, as early as February 2022, we have launched a Living Rivers initiative for the ecological restoration of Indus rivers, Indus Basin. It is supported by FAO and UNDP and the Ministry of Climate Change in Pakistan. So it is not that these two countries are not following the global mind. They are not changing themselves according to the global mind, or they are not part of the people with advanced thinking who are shaping up the global mind. But we have some challenges. First of all, it was mentioned by the earlier speakers as well, that rivers, they are a source of uniting people. Rivers unite people, because all the civilizations around the world, they have emerged around water. all great civilizations. And when we say that they have emerged around water, that means a civilization is basically a unity of people who are working with some common interest, with some common objectives and common goals. Therefore, water actually unites people. Then why water wars? Water is a source of unity. Water will only divide people when people will divide water. This was something I wrote last year on Twitter, means the same that I've just explained. The problem is our unsustainable development models, which started since mid 1850s and continue until today. We have not changed much from that old thinking, at least in our planning of so-called development structures within our rivers. Our projects for water management are structurally heavy, and we follow engineering approaches with complete disregards to socioeconomic consequences. There is basic violation of hydrology in development of Indus Basin, ignoring equation of continuity. Now, this is a bit technical thing, but this is very simple to understand. It means that water coming into the system and water leaving from the system, in long-term average, it should balance out as zero. So as much water is coming in the system, as much should be leaving the system, because if that is not the case, either the system is accumulating water or the water is being drained out of the system. So a sustainable system would have a long-term average of this thing as zero. But when we say water moving into the system, it is not just water. Water doesn't move alone. Water carries with itself some suspended solids, which is sand and silt and all those things, and water carries with itself dissolved solids, which are salts. Now, by ignoring the equation of continuity, how we ignored it? We developed Indus Basin on Indus Water Treaty with a very strong suggestion from Mr. Lilienthal, who wrote in one of his essays that the waters of Indus rivers are flowing out to the sea and being wasted. So projects should be undertaken where this water is prevented from going into the sea and not being wasted, but being utilized. Now, what does that mean? That the water is coming into the system, but it's not leaving the system. Consequently, water is accumulating in your system. And we have seen waterlogging, we have seen salinity. For waterlogging, we have done so many projects. We have spent billions on our scarp drains, tile drains, and so many things. Still, that problem is there. You go to Sindh, you will see urban salinity, you will see agricultural salinity. So is case in Punjab, in many places of Punjab, southern Punjab especially. You go to Dunga Bunga, Harunabad, all these places suffering from salinity and waterlogging. Similarly, the salts which are being drained out by Indus River. Now, Indus River at an average was draining out about 50 million tons of dissolved salts every year into the sea. Now, when Indus water from more than almost 200 million acre feet of water for the whole basin, which was draining out into the sea, now less than 20 flows out to the sea every year, which means 1/10, which means at least 45 million tons of salt every year are being deposited in your landscape. So your landscape is being salinized with 40 million tons of salt year after year after year. So you are losing your fertile soils. Because as long as that salt is there in the system and it's not draining out, it is destroying your landscape. So those are the scientific violations that have happened in our major planning, especially based on Indus Water Treaty. Then, according to this treaty, 3 rivers were completely shut down, unprecedented anywhere in the world. You don't shut down a river. There had been many rivers which have been diverted and dammed, but no river had been completely shut down, except the 3 in Indus Water Treaty. And then the treaty did not stop there. Treaty also allowed the 2 countries to use the emptied riverbeds for dumping of agricultural waste, industrial waste, and all sorts of pollution. And no limit to pollution was given in the treaty. Both countries agreed to it, that, okay, we can use these rivers for dumping of sewerage and industrial and agricultural waste. So our old development models are a big problem. We have to rethink those development models. What are our pathways ahead? Approaching the transboundary issues. First of all, these are some overall thematic things, strategic, I would say, values that we must carry with us when we are talking about transboundary issues. Cooperation versus confrontation. That should be the design. We should go for cooperation rather than confrontation. Then sharing rather than dividing. Indus Water Treaty divided the basin. 3 rivers here, 3 rivers there. That division is the root cause of all the problems. Adaptation with nature rather than trying to tame the nature. Nature cannot be tamed. Nature is still too big. And we should realize that we are not as big as the nature is. Nature will tell you one way or the other that we are still smaller than nature. So we should try to adapt with the nature. Ecological integrity of the basins, it is very important. You know, a big part of Indian Ocean depended on Indus Delta, which was the 2nd largest delta in the basin. The biggest one is Sundarban in Bangladesh. The 2nd one was Indus Delta. So many live species, they depended on the mangroves of Indus Basin, Indus Delta, and then the whole food chain and the whole species were linked down to the fish species and deep sea species of the Indian Ocean. All are being impacted. We just don't know. That doesn't mean it's not happening. It's happening. Now we have to think of regenerative development. Sustainability is not enough. We have to now regenerate. The lost systems should come back. The lost wetlands, the lost forests, they should come back. Just by staying where we are is not enough. Then adaptation for climate change. This is something very important because it was mentioned in the earlier speeches that we are losing our glaciers, monsoon rains are increasing. So how we are going to adapt? Adaptation is very important. I'll talk about that. What are our options? And then, of course, integrated management and socio-environmental, economical sustainability. All those things should be put in the forefront. Now, every suggestion that is made in the transboundary negotiations should run through the sieve of these few elements. I mean, this is not a comprehensive list. This could be refined in case of any negotiations which are going on. And there's something very important, especially between the relations of India and Pakistan. Our thinking should not be going back to link our present with our past. Our thinking should be linking our present with our future, because our past is not very cherishable in many ways. We should, if we are governed by our past, we would be governed by prejudice. So we should forget about prejudice. We should embrace the global mind, and we should look into the future rather than in the past. What models of dialogue can actually lead to such discussions? This is my suggestion. It's open to discussion, open to criticism, open to improvement. But what I say is that whenever a dialogue is designed between the 2 countries, the first and foremost, it should start at local scales. The experts from the 2 countries, they sit together and they should discuss their local problems, which are not transboundary, which are not contentious, which are within their own control and within their own boundaries. And they should tell what are the problems, technical, environmental, social, legal, economic, managerial, and local transboundary problems. Then the two countries should share with each other, the policies and strategies that they are using to solve their internal problems. And then both countries should discuss the impediments that they are facing in solving those problems, whether they are technical, whether they are bureaucratic, political, financial, economic, or the like. And then the two countries should discuss how global mind aligns or not aligns with the way they are dealing with their problems. When they discuss their internal problems, then the stage is set in terms of all sorts of problems and in conformity with global mind. And only then we should come over to the transboundary issues. And again, all the transboundary issues should go through this sieve: emerging global mind, scientific reasoning, socioeconomic consequences, environmental consequences, and consequences of cost sustained because of hostilities. Because hostilities have a cost. And the world is so full of knowledge base. There are basic principles of integrated water resources management. This is a UNESCO publication. It says free flow. The word says it all. Water belongs to the river, where it flows and as it flows. The connection and interlinkages between land, river, and ecology are poorly understood. So when they are poorly understood, we should be very conscious about making decisions and go with the flow. It's free for all. Now, here is a conceptual sustainability governance matrix. This is the kind of thing which should be at the back of our minds, that for any river which is freely flowing and society is fully adapted to it, it is fully sustainable. The more you have less adaptation, the lesser the adaptation, and the more the structural control, the less you are sustainable. So this is a qualitative picture that should always be in our mind. And this is what we suggest. It's kind of a template that we must do due diligence of every river-based economic engine, whether it's agriculture or hydropower or irrigation or navigation or whatever. You must see whatever you are suggesting, a big project or a small project, what are the externalities of that project? What are the internalities of that project? What is the initial cost? What is the final cost? What is the break even? That kind of economic analysis is a must. And whenever you propose something, you must propose alternates. Just proposing one solution and then just keeping every other alternate out of the discussion is not the way to go. There should be alternative discussed, and then through a very robust network of analysis, you must come up with the best which is possible, which is acceptable, and which would be best for generations to come. We have emerging soil moisture management systems which can actually reduce the agricultural water demand, irrigation water demand from 50 to 70%. Those systems are now coming up in the world. There are river aquifers we have. The aquifers which are under the river can be recharged by floods if the river floodplain is managed properly. And they can recharge your aquifers more than 400 to 500 million acre feet of usable water. A large dam can only go 4 to 5. This is 2 orders of magnitude higher. So this is how the management can take place. Then combining the two, demand management in agriculture sector and aquifer management along the rivers can save you the water and can store your water and can save your water. So this is a conceptual picture of the current system in which rivers are closed within their dikes and floodplains are being used for all sorts of agriculture and other things and all that. And then this is a future which is more nature-based and more prosperous. If rivers can start flowing again, there is no conflict. The conflict between India and Pakistan and in many other places is because the rivers are not flowing. Our models want to stop the rivers from flowing and the conflicts keep on increasing. We have to revert ourselves to the systems and the tools, scientific, managerial, law, everything combined together, which would let the rivers flow. If rivers start flowing, the old treaties and old structures which are causing damage to the environment would become simply irrelevant. This is a river in Europe. We were talking about Danube and Rhine this morning. This is another river, Sava. It actually enters in Danube. It's a tributary of Danube. It's again a transboundary river, and it's a flowing river. And at the end, this is how the river looks like. This is the end of the river. This is Belgrade, the boat and the river people. They are happy people, prosperous society, and beautiful flowing rivers. Indus, which is about 5 times bigger than Sava River. This is the end of the river, the boat, and the river people. This has to change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hassan, for this very thought-provoking talk on enhancing transboundary cooperation water sources management. Now we would request Dr. Mehda Bishop, who is from the International Relations South Asia University, New Delhi. He will be talking on transboundary water issue between Pakistan and India. Dr. Bishop, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Am I audible?
Sure, yes.
All right, great. So good morning again. It's afternoon here in India. And I'd like to thank the ISSI for inviting me and offering me this platform to essentially share my views with all of you. Now, as you all know, the topic which was essentially given to me by the organizers was transboundary water issues between India and Pakistan. And essentially in the odd 15 minutes, which I have today, I hope to communicate effectively the story of India-Pakistan through the lens of water. And I'm very glad that the first speaker did a brilliant job in setting the stage and kickstarting the debate. And I hope that some of the arguments that I put forth today will perhaps make you think in terms of taking some of these ideas further. Now, let me just come to the primary argument which I have for today. I have a very specific question which I intend to answer. And my question is that can the Indus Water Treaty be framed as a water governance treaty? And I think that's important because for me, understanding the empirical actuality is very important before we really move ahead in terms of thinking about the future. And I think that both India and Pakistan, to start with, have a legal framework, the Indus Water Treaty, and it will be interesting for us to really see what can we do with the existing circumstances that we are in. So essentially, in the first bit of my presentation, I will be talking about a negotiated approach to water diplomacy, where essentially I am building an argument. I then come to the case study, which is, of course, as you all know, the Indus Water Treaty. And then I revisit the Indus Water Treaty in terms of culling out its limitations. But before I really take you to this journey, I think understanding the South Asian quote unquote context that I think we all are in needs to be pretty clear. And these quotations out here will give you a brief idea as to why so distinct South Asia is as a region. South Asia is a strategic context. We know that most of the rivers that flow are from areas which are contested, and therefore sovereignty claims rise high when it comes to the sharing of transboundary rivers. So I think, when we are making these comparative arguments, we need to be very, very clear about the context. As I said in the beginning, that moving on from empirical actuality becomes very important. Now, having that in mind, having that broad framework in mind, recognizing it, I just take a step back and look at the negotiated agreements on water in South Asia. By the way, South Asia has not done badly. It has negotiated agreements on some of the rivers. And when we look at, what are the patterns which are emerging, there are two patterns which come out. The first, I would say, is a distributive method, and the second is an integrative method. The distributive method is what probably Thomas Schelling would call as distributive bargaining, where essentially it means that both countries benefit from an agreement, even though that specific agreement favors one country more than the other. And the other, by Howard Reifer, is a bargaining model, where the primary argument is that both countries benefit and from a particular agreement, and the cooperative potential is actually equally distributed. Now, interestingly, if you look at the basic assumptions, and again, you come back to the context from these concepts, you see that in South Asia, when we're looking at the agreements, there are two kinds of partnerships. The first is cooperative partners, and I would say that cooperative partners, one category which falls into it, which comes to my mind, is India, Bhutan. And the second one, I think, is cooperative antagonists. And I think when it comes to India, Pakistan, essentially it would fall within the cooperative antagonist category, because the idea is that, some agreement is better than no agreement. And I think that, that's the assumption behind cooperative antagonists. We don't have strident antagonists so far in South Asia. Now, what I'm going to argue today in terms of talking about the Indus Water Treaty as a governance treaty, it's important to actually move away from a rational to the relational approach. And there is where I'll actually go back to this argument of the global mind by the first speaker, who essentially was telling us to move to a relational approach from a rational approach. And the relational approach, as I say, is essentially an ecosystems approach. And there is where I think I argue that if we intend to see some hope in future, and in case we want to really start our building blocks, both countries actually need to shift their actions from a more rationalistic approach to a relationalist approach. And I'll come to the reason why. But quickly to specify what is relationality and rationality. So when you're looking at rationality, it has the singular focus on a volumetric allocation of water. But on the other hand, if you're looking at relationality, it expands the definition of water, I would say, to surface water, which is water quality. It looks at preservation of wetlands, biodiversity. It looks at soil erosion. It talks about conjunctive use of ground and surface water, essentially through nature-based solutions. Again, going back to some of the arguments which were raised by the previous speaker. And I think this is what a relational approach to water means. And I do agree with him that we need to be adaptive when it comes to South Asia. And the first thought which came to my mind is that, if you think about the idea of South Asia, I always say that Bangladesh is a deltaic country. And today, I think, from Pakistan, one can also say that Pakistan is a deltaic country. And I think that, our understanding of the idea of South Asia, or the idea of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, should actually start from a more ecological cartography, because that is what South Asia essentially sustains on. Now, let me just come to the brick and the mortar of my presentation case study. IWT was signed in 1960. Essentially took 8 years to negotiate this treaty. Primarily was fructified due to the intervention of World Bank. And if you look at the pattern of negotiations, it is a water not a sharing river, but it's a water partition treaty. And there was a huge emphasis on distributive bargaining by both the parties. So distributing bargaining is essentially, where I want to maximize my benefits and minimize the benefits of the was what was going on between India and Pakistan, and that is what essentially took it 8 long years. But we do know that it was a mediation success, and primary reasons for this, of course, were both India and Pakistan were young post-colonial states. There were, of course, financial incentives coming from the international community. Reputational benefits were involved, given that both World Bank and the US were invested in the treaty. Of course, the Cold War dynamics played their role, and we know that Cold War has played a very important role in terms of the strategic identity that South Asia has. And of course, there was a carrot and stick policy, and that's how the positions of both these countries softened over a period of time. Now, fast forward this, I would say, to the next 6 to 7 decades, and we see that the political narrative of the Indus Basin is essentially centered around the Western rivers, which to my mind has conflictual undertones. Again, if you look at the diplomatic positions of both the parties, they are fixated on water allocations with water governance issues, highly politicized. And the speaker in the morning was talking about this. And I think, when it really comes to the role of India, India has been very, very defensive about securing its water rights. That's how the discourse starts, water rights. On Pakistan's part, I would say that, and the way it would perhaps be looked at from India is that, the kind of objections that Pakistan has had towards the hydropower projects is essentially a delaying tactic for delaying the projects, putting objections to projects. And of course, there is also an argument that, Pakistan is always very comfortable with a third-party mediation. And that perhaps has been the idea in terms of internationalizing the disputes. For its own reasons, Pakistan is a lower riparian. It has these upper riparian fears where defense and tactical reasons, linkages to Kashmir continue. And what we see that despite this, Indus Water Treaty has succeeded. However, the thought of renegotiating the Indus Water Treaty exists. And what we see essentially is that there is a binary between the internal and the external. And there is where I think, water diplomacy and water governance become incommensurable realities. And what essentially happens then is that, the zone of possible agreement, which could actually exist between these two countries, sort of shrinks down. And we continue with the same pattern of distributive bargaining, which I think will not lead us anywhere. So I would say that some of the geopolitical questions I raise for both India and Pakistan. To India, I would ask that will the tactic of stopping rivers' natural flow act as a deterrent to Pakistan? Well, I would say that not really. It could be a propaganda, a diplomatic gimmick, but I think it's not feasible if you would just call the ecologists, because how can you actually stop the natural flow of the water down? You'll have to flood your own territory for that. The second is that, and this is for Pakistan, that will delaying tactics on projects help Pakistan in any way? Because as I said, the whole discourse is very right-centric. And then the question comes in front of us that, this is what the reality is. Can we revisit the Indus Water Treaty? And in the past few years, we see that, this argument last year, there was this report, a parliamentary report, which talked about renegotiating the Indus Water Treaty. But when you actually become a realist and you try to look at the details, I would say that an alternative to Indus Water Treaty, would have high costs, because revoking the IWT is easy, but then renegotiating it on clear terms, would be very difficult. So when we're talking about renegotiating the Indus Water Treaty, I would say that I think both India and Pakistan again should have that global mind, decenter our current understanding of Indus Water Treaty, and blunting this discourse of perceiving water as an instrument for winning bargaining games. most of the time we see that either issues are nationalized or securitized. And this leads to conflict escalation. But I think what we need to do now is to really reframe the spatial identity of the river, where water quality and nutrition security becomes important. We are not just talking about food security now. Because of the immense contamination of groundwater, there are issues of nutrition security which have emerged in Punjab. And I think we need to also rethink the nature of interventions. And there is where I would also emphasize the scalar approach to looking at the Indus water basin rather than having one size fit all. And I think that, in this process, we could re-script the understanding of rivers through the lens of the ecosystem, a webs approach, where wetlands, energy, biodiversity, and sediments become very important, because this is what gives life to the river. Now, some of these findings actually came out from one of the projects which I did with Pakistan, and we studied the Ravi River. So we took a very minor river instead of the major rivers that we often talk about in South Asia. Let's talk about these minor rivers and see that what is it that they can have to offer us. For instance, both sides, water users treaty heavily relies on the allocations of 1960s, which are unsuitable, unsustainable for 21st century. There is no legal instrument for addressing the impact of climate change on water allocations. And I think these are rising, emerging concerns. And there is where I would say that, let's move on to a relational approach. Let's move on from water diplomacy, from winning bargaining games to water governance. And interestingly, when we did this local survey, and this was, in fact, what the previous speaker talked about, it was a very local, centered kind of an approach. So my colleagues in Pakistan were looking at their side. They had dialogues at 3 levels: at the local level, at the national level, and we also had dialogues at the local level and the national level. And we tried understanding, but the focus was on eastern rivers. We tried understanding the value preferences of both India and Pakistan. Pakistan, clearly, flood management, water quality, minimum environmental flows, concerns over exploitation of groundwater, and absence of regulatory mechanisms, and cropping patterns became a major issue. Value preferences of India, again, hydrological structures in J&K, utilization of waters from the eastern rivers, concerns over exploitation of groundwater without regulatory mechanisms, same problems which both Punjabs have: water quality, shifting water tables, and the river course, and cropping patterns. And interestingly, when you do start doing the negotiation arithmetic, and when you start thinking about, okay, what could be the way forward? One could see that, okay, yes, there are concerns of the Western rivers, both for India and Pakistan, but I think there are concerns over the Eastern rivers also. And I think that, one needs to establish these linkages in terms of trying to take this idea of cooperation forward. So prioritizing water governance, which is of mutual benefit to both countries, should be underlined. And it is here that I would say that, rather than taking a very exclusivist approach on the Indus Water Treaty, cooperative measures should be initiated. And I go back to this existing legal framework which we have, which is Article 7, because this will strengthen side benefits and establish complementarities between both countries. So let's go back to the Indus Water Treaty, make Article 7 our entry point. Interestingly, the treaty talks about future cooperation here. Yes, it has its limitations, but then, it has some hope also. And the idea was to look at that hope and see that, how can you move forward? So the two parties here in the treaty, the article itself is written, the two parties recognize that they have a common interest in the optimum development of rivers, and to that end, they share common intention to cooperate to the fullest possible extent. Article 5 stipulates the earnestness one should exhibit in data sharing. It has specifications in terms of establishing hydrological and meteorological stations, supplying observable data, carrying out drainage works. Treaty explicitly recognizes cooperation on engineering works, cooperation emerging from dams, storage, diversions, and drainage systems. And there are a lot of ways to actually cooperate, in terms of looking at just these non-consumptive uses of water, and this idea of flowing rivers. How can you actually move forward from what you have right now. Again, Article 4 notes that execution of flood control should not cause material damage, and both parties can undertake measures for preventing river erosion and promoting river protection. You can just read it. I don't know how much time I have, but these, I think Article 4 and Article 9 are important because they actually lead you to looking at the Indus Water Treaty from an alternate dimension. And therefore, I would say that if both countries start with water governance and water mismanagement, it will go a long way in strengthening water diplomacy. There are domestic issues related to water governance, and that is what the countries need to look at. Value preferences of stakeholders in the two countries reveal that while there are variations in priorities, similarities exist. The Indus Water Treaty discourse has been too centric on conflictual overtones with little emphasis on internal mainstreaming of governance challenges. And here I would say that de-link negotiations from dialogue, this is a precondition, I would say, for effective communication at the bilateral and the multilateral level. And again, the last point, localized water diplomacy through water governance approaches. And I think that is really the bright star, which can perhaps lead us towards looking forward to cooperative frameworks on transboundary water management in South Asia. So thank you for listening. And yes, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bisa, for this very nice and very thought-provoking, presentation. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you allow me, I will just go to the stage and just summarize what has been talked about, what is the way forward. Yes, sir. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, you have listened both the talks and also the earlier speakers in the introduction session. Both these speakers, they have highlighted basically the importance of the rivers. They have treated these rivers as the living organism, living things. They have highlighted that for managing these rivers, we need to apply the international mind, global mind. We need to move from rational to the relational. We need to move from the competition to the benefit sharing. We need to move from the confrontation to the cooperation. So ladies and gentlemen, this is very important. And you know that rivers are always, they provide unique link between human, socio-economic, culture, and ecosystem services. And Dr. Hassan Abbas has focused on this very nicely. So this is very important because they provide the ecosystem services to the whole humanity and the whole. One of the most important message which we have got from these two presentations is that we need to adopt the strategy of water cooperation instead of using water as a weapon. We should not use water as a weapon, rather we should use water for the welfare of the human being, water for the welfare of both the riparian countries and the other countries who are using this water. Ladies and gentlemen, these are one of the most important points when we look at the way forward, how we should move forward. So one of the most important points for moving forward is the data sharing. When we share the data, it in fact helps to build trust between the two riparian countries among the people of those countries. And this trust basically leads to coordination between the countries and among the countries. And coordination ultimately leads to cooperation and agreement and benefit sharing. So this equation has to be completed. But this equation cannot be completed when we use or involve the political leadership or the politicians. To go from the data sharing to the cooperation and benefit sharing, we have to adopt this the professional approach. I give you example of the Akron rivers that is flowing between the Armenia and Turkey. And you know that since 1990, there is no diplomatic relation between Armenia and Turkey. But they are managing water very nicely without any conflict. The reason simply that they have taken up this at the highest professional level, at the minimum political level. Armenian has their instrumentation flow measuring devices installation in Turkey, and Turkey has their installation in the Armenia. So they meet frequently. So in certain cases, 4 times a month, and certain cases even they increase the frequency of that. So this data sharing has helped them to build this trust, to build the cooperation, and ultimately for the benefit sharing of all those. So ladies and gentlemen, along with the quantity of water, as one of the speakers has mentioned, quality of water also matters. It's very important. If you know, for example, we used to listen from the Benjamin Franklin, who says that we know the worth of well when it is dry. So a well can be dry because of the 2 reasons. Number 1, the water is so deep that it becomes uneconomical to pump. Secondly, the water is at the arm's length, but it is not of usable quality. To maintaining quality of the ecosystem is one of the most important parameters if you want to keep the rivers alive, if you want to use the ecosystem services, if you want to share the benefit among the riparians. I give you the example of the Eastern River. We are in fact monitoring all Western and Eastern River, particularly we are monitoring Eastern River at the strategic location when these rivers enter into Pakistan, and then they basically join the others, barrages and all those points. So you will be amazed to know that in certain period of time, particularly during the dry period, the DO level, dissolved oxygen in the Ravi and Satluj, is dropped to 0. When we say drop to 0, it means no aquatic life can persist. No aquatic life can survive. So when the aquatic life cannot survive, how we can use the ecosystem services? How we can say that the rivers are alive? So we have converted those rivers into sewerage channels, wastewater carrying channel. One of the example is the Hudayara drain that brings water from the Indian side, and it is bringing a huge wastewater with all kind of heavy metal, even persistent organic pollutants, POPs. We have found the POPs in those rivers, and also in the Hudayara drain. Not only from the Indian side, these pollutants are coming, and more importantly, we are also adding from all industrial waste into all these. So Dr. Bishit has nicely pointed out that I think we need to consider it, and Dr. Hassan also focus on this, that we need to move from focus on the water governance issue, because in both the countries, water governance issues are very important. If we focus on the water governance issues, then we will be able to, and take it at the professional level, we will be able to manage these rivers and use the water sustainably. So ladies and gentlemen, with these remarks, I would like to thank all the organizers. I would like to thank Dr. Hassan, Dr. Bishop for their wonderful presentation and remarks, and providing us some food for thought for our future thinking, research, and working. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Dr. Hassan and our colleague, thank you very much. And over to you, sir. Thank you.